It's Hi everyone, welcome to our live. And my dog's gonna bark as soon as I go live, of course. Hold on, Anya. Maybe you could talk.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well.
Maybe tell them what we're gonna talk about. The dog will stop in 1 second.
Okay, so I think we're gonna talk about Freudian stuff today, right? So the last 2 weeks we've been talking about the Idaho 4. We've been talking about Kohberger, and today I think we're gonna focus on some Freudian psychoanalytic type theories revolving around Kohberger to try and understand maybe a little bit more about why he did some of the things, if he did do them, and make those connections there, especially since he was someone who was quite into Freudian ways as well. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. So glad you came. So I was in another live and Tammy was in there and she was like, I would love to see your stuff or whatever. So I was like, come on over in an hour, I'll be live. So there you go. So hopefully Tammy will subscribe and come back and see us. So I'm Dr. Jamie Vona and this is Dr. Anya Schultz. And we both teach at the same college and we both teach at universities. We teach everything from abnormal psychology to developmental, child psychopersonality, research methods, statistics. We do it all. We cover all of it. So I have to tell you, this was a good homework assignment, if you will. Hi, James. Oh, look, people are starting to come in. I love people. I said. But I'm so glad that we did this. So you guys, this is our third episode. So first we started talking about Kohberger's childhood. Let me tell everybody what our mission is. We like to spread word about psychological things that can help everybody in their everyday lives, but using true crime to do so. So that's pretty much what we're doing here. So a lot of people have gotten great feedback. People really like it. So we're here again. So last time before we left, we decided that we were going to do Freudian stuff because apparently Kohberger, I don't know if you found anything out about his interest in Freud. Were you able to find anything?
Not too much.
There wasn't as much as I thought there was.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to text Nina. So go ahead, start us off and I'll text Nina because Nina's the one that seemed to know a lot of the information too.
About the Freudian stuff. Yeah.
Yes, because I have a lot of Freudian notes and I did see some of the Freudian stuff and I do remember seeing Freudian stuff with him before, but
yeah, I didn't find anything.
I would like to know.
I didn't find anything too specific relating to him, but when I was doing some of the research, because he was so into true crime himself, I feel like when he was doing a lot of the research, it took on some Freudian tendencies, because I think even with profiling, no matter how you look at it, profiling is a theory, just like psychology is based in a lot of theories. And psychoanalytic theory is just one of those things that really links childhood trauma to adult trauma or adult behavior in some way. So it just made sense for him to kind of focus on some of those perspectives, I think.
I agree. And I also, to add to that, I think that it is not uncommon, and we hear this sometimes, but we don't always talk about it, but it's not uncommon for somebody to go into psychology with the hopes of trying to figure out their own psychology, right? So we see that all the time. So it could just be that that's what he was trying to do, because he then goes into criminology. So it wasn't that he loved psychology and like therapy, because he didn't go for like his master's and that or his doctorate in that. He switches over to criminal justice. So and again, everything we say here is alleged. And again, our bigger thing here is about the psychology part and helping people, but we're doing this using cases. So with that being said, this was one of the best homework assignments I've had. And unfortunately, I only had like today to really look into things, but it was like a domino effect for me. So like the first thing that fell, I had like a chain reaction. I don't know about you guys, but a lot of these people can type very fast, but in my generation, not everybody types very fast, and I'm not a very fast typer. We both did dissertations. I did my dissertation like this. Like I literally am not like one of these. So with that being said, I learned that you could use the microphone, the voice thing, and it'll do it for you type thing. And then you just go back and edit the things that, the things from Philly that it doesn't really understand. And you have to go back and you're like, no, I didn't say that. And I have to go back and fix it. But other than that, it gets most of it. But look, I literally, in like a 2-hour span, just like had a brrr onto the page, which I'm glad happened. But so what I did was, the way that I approached this was I put on my, for a lack of better terms, Freudian hat, and was like, if you were a psychoanalyst and you were thinking from Freud's perspective, because at first I started getting nervous because I was like, I'm not finding too much of like him talking about Freud. So I didn't have a whole lot of that to bring, but I'm like, wait a minute. We said that we were going to look at it through Freud's eyes too. So, or like that whole thing. So I think this will be really good. So where should we start?
I don't know where. I mean, I also did the same thing you did. I kind of looked at Kohberger.
And just so you guys know, we don't talk before this. Like that's one of the things. The very first episode, we started to like talk and go back, and I was like, "What are we doing?" I was like, "Why aren't we doing this?" Like it was like such good conversation. I'm like, "Why?" So we've decided like we don't talk about this beforehand. So I have not talked to Dr. Schultz since last week until like 5 minutes ago when we got on the live, but we weren't talking about this. So with keeping that in mind, I think that that's good to tell people, because they're seeing from your point of view and from my point of view, and then they can create their own point of view. And that's the whole thing with psychology and human perception and things like that. We could all experience the same thing and perceive it differently. So I think that that's important. So I guess I'll start off. So when I was looking, I guess one of my biggest things that I learned when I looked at this case through Freudian's eyes, or like a Freudian therapist eyes, what I realized, one of the biggest things that jumped out for me was the fact that he intellectualizes everything as opposed to like being emotional about it. So I wrote about Kohberger didn't just study criminology, he seemed to immerse himself in it reportedly. And again, I did this, I have sources that I could add at the end when we're done. I could go back and add them, but I do have sources for all this. So reportedly engaging in deep discussions about criminals' thought processes rather than the victim's experiences or emotions. So where he was more focused on how the criminal is thinking and like what they're going through, and less about what he probably should be thinking about, and that's the humanization of his victims. And then I just put, if he had a deep-rooted interest in violence or control, which we talked about last time with eating disorders and addiction. So we have that lack of control, and having an addiction or an eating disorder feels like you're in control in the moment, but it's a very out of control behavior. So we know that there's control in his history. So if he had deep-rooted interest in violence or control, right, which we know that he does, intellectualization would have allowed him to study crime without confronting its horror. Instead of empathizing with the victims or experiencing emotional discomfort, he could view violence as an abstract puzzle, something to be studied and dissected rather than felt. So I feel like for him, it's like if I just don't make you Dr. Anya Schultz and you just become some person with blue hair that, you know what I mean, that I'm just seeing as an object. Now I can study you and I can get to know you like down to a science as opposed to getting to know you type thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What do
Yeah,
you
I
think
agree
about
with
that?
that because I actually had the intellectualization under one of his defense mechanisms.
I did the same thing.
So
That's
I did
funny.
break stuff down because I thought um, that it was interesting as I was looking at different things. Like I looked at displacement and the
So
idea
did
of
I.
projection. I think he did a lot of those things because he had what seems to be resentment. If all of this that we're seeing on the internet is true, he resented the people who bullied him. I think he resented his parents and sisters a little bit.
I do
Um,
too.
and then that kind of displaced into anger as he got older. But at the same time, the intellectualization let him kind of emotionally remove himself from criminal behavior and almost validate his own behaviors, even though
Yes.
they are odd and inappropriate to begin with. He didn't want to see it that way, which could be the narcissism that we talked about in previous
Ooh,
sessions
am
as
I
well.
starting to get you to think the narcissism thing?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
I'm
I see
definitely
it.
on board with the narcissism. I would still like to know. I did try and look up to see if he's had a psychological report done. I
I
don't
don't
think
think he
he
has. I
has
think
so far.
everything's like self evaluation.
I think right now, I think the only thing I saw was 2 weeks ago, he was in court and they're just working on what evidence is going to be available when he goes to trial. And I feel like hopefully between now and then they'll do a psychological report because I was finding some funky things about his behavior after he was arrested, which I never saw
Oh,
before. So I
really?
don't
Like
even
what?
know if it's true. I would need
So
someone
wait,
else
tell
to
me, maybe we
back me
could,
up.
and people in the chat also, like if you could add to something or whatever, please do. But what did you like? Give me an example of
The
the
only thing I
behavior that
heard
he did.
was that when he was arrested for a moment of time, there was apparently this woman who was an inmate at the same time. But again,
Okay.
I don't know how true this is, but I happened to try and look up like behaviors during arrest. I was like looking up a whole bunch of different things, and this was just one thing that came up. And she claimed that he tried to expose himself to her. So I don't know whether it's her misinterpretation of something. Apparently, she heard him rapping, which I thought was interesting since we have him rapping in younger years,
He was.
which I
I
have
wonder
looked
if that was
at.
in Pennsylvania because I think in when he went back to when he goes back to Idaho, I believe the Idaho jail is under the courthouse and it only holds like 16 prisoners. So, but I would assume that if it only holds 16 prisoners, that it would be,
I don't know.
I don't know, would it be unisex? I'm not sure. So if anybody in the chat knows, let us know. But even if we don't take that, right? So even if we put that aside, even things like how he said when he got arrested, he allegedly said, am I the only person that you arrested or
Mhm.
something along those?
Yeah,
I feel like so did Ted Bundy. He also said that.
I can't remember, but I'm sure he
Either
did.
way, either
Narcissist.
way, is that what you would say if the FBI bust your door down for that?
Right. No.
Like I would be like, what are you talking about? Like what is going on right now? Like I'd be freaking out. I wouldn't just be chilling like,
Yeah.
did you arrest anybody else? You got anybody else for this, or am I the only one going down? Frank's here. Frank, I don't have your cell phone number for some reason. I literally was saying to Dr. Schultz, I was like, I'm going to text Truth, which I don't see yet. Hopefully she'll jump in. And I wanted to text you and was like, I don't have Frank's number. So maybe at some point, Frank, we can get your phone number so that if we do come on, not that you missed anything, we just came on, but good to see you, Frank. Go ahead, Tammy. What are you saying? It's almost like he had rejection and fear. Oh, look at she's coming out with like the Freudian terms. It's like he had rejection inferiority and
Yep.
then decided to try to have intellectual superiority. That is so well said. There has to be wait, hold on. There has to be a blah, 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 blah.
Predictatory.
I couldn't get that out. Thank you. Identifiers. Thank you for jumping in. That's how well we know each other, that she knew that I was having a tongue twister there. And I guess it was hard to say. Infinity, welcome. So, just in case you're just coming in, you guys, I don't know if you remember from last week, but we challenged ourselves to look at the Kohberger case through a Freudian type eyes. So, the only thing you missed so far, if you just came in, is that we were talking about, for me, one of the biggest things that popped out for me when I was looking at this through Freudian eyes was that he has the ability to intellectualize. I do think it's important, though, that we need to really did not expect to get caught that fast. No, you're probably right, Frank. He probably didn't expect to get caught that fast, which is probably why there's no evidence in the car because, or so they say, that there's no evidence in the car. Yeah, I believe the prosecution and the defense both like conceded to that or whatever they call it. So in that case, he did take a ton of steps not to get caught. And this is the thing, you were saying that before you came when you were looking at the court stuff. And if the judge decides that he's trying to say that they invaded his Fourth Amendment right to privacy because they uploaded his DNA to like GenMatch or whatever. However, if you're going to be technical, that's not true. If they invaded anybody's privacy, it was your ancestors, not yours. And once you throw out your trash, it now is public. So and that's a Supreme Court thing. Like that's already been to the Supreme Court, but that's what our argument is. And the scary thing is the judge, I'm dying to know, Frank and all, like what you guys think, but the judge didn't rule that day.
No.
If that's all they, not all, but if that's all the DNA evidence, because at one part he asked the prosecution and the prosecution says something like, yes, judge, if you throw this out, it would hinder the prosecution's case.
Yeah.
But so could you guys imagine, like, what if he intellectualized this a little bit too? This is the thing. This is what makes it dangerous, is that when you have the ability to do something like this, and again, this is just a legend, but if this happens to be him, okay, the first thing we said was that it's odd that when they arrested him, that he wasn't freaking out. Like, why are you here? Why did you just bust the door down? Like, why, like, what is happening? Like, he literally said, am I the only person you arrested? Okay. So again, I think he uses intellectualization. Oh, that's what I was going to say, you guys. So I think it's important. Let's just take 1 minute to tell people about Freud, just in case, because I don't want to assume that everybody in here knows who Freud is. I even know that a few of my basic psych students might be in here, and we only touched upon it briefly. So you guys, so maybe I could look up a list of like the like 15 defense mechanisms type thing, just to see if I can give a visual. But the id, ego, and super ego is real easy. Ready? Your id is your first instinct. It's what you want. Your super ego is like your values and morals. Your ego is somewhere in the middle. So it's like what we do. Some people lean more towards their id, others more towards their super ego. So for example, you're on a diet and you just get home from the gym and your favorite cookies, somebody surprises you and makes your favorite cookies. Your id says, I want to eat them, all of them. Your super ego jumps in and says, hold on. You've been doing so good. You're down 10 pounds. Don't do it. Like, there's no need. Your ego is what you decide to do. For some people, they'd be like, fuck it, and they eat it. For other people, they might do something like cover it up and walk away. And then there could be somebody even that takes a bite of it and walks away. But the thing is that we all will do something, we could all do something different. So there's many choices. There's not one right answer there. But the ego is what is that balance in the middle. Do you want to add anything to the id, ego, and super ego?
No, I can give an example with Kohberger. So
yeah, do it.
So for when I look at his id with the social struggles plus a lot of the isolation, I look at repressed rage. Like that normally will lead to some sort of repressed rage. So let's say, and so what happens is his id, ego, and super ego have been struggling for a very long time. And then when your id goes unchecked and all of a sudden you let yourself live in your id, that repressed anger kind of now becomes your reality, and you're playing into the ego at that point. Now that was the decision you made.
And that is so important, you guys. That was so well said. Abby, hi, Abby. Abby says hi to both of us.
Hi, Abby.
That's awesome. That's so cool. We both have taught Abby. So then we have okay, so that's great. If anybody has any id, ego, or super ego questions, or any questions, just put it in the chat and we'll answer it to the best of our ability. So Frank says, because he's him not being phased while something is going on while any other person would jump 10 feet would be pretty interesting. So again, it doesn't make him guilty, right, Frank? But it is a little bit like, would you just be like, oh, did you arrest anybody else? Like, I just couldn't. And again, that doesn't make him guilty, you guys. So that's not what we're claiming here. We're just putting on our Freudian hats and saying that if we were a Freudian, if we were thinking in a psychoanalytic way, to us, that would not be what we usually see. We just talked about the id, ego, and superego. So maybe this is where we just tell them what an ego ideal is. So you guys, your ego ideal is not who you are. It's your idealized version of who you are. The problem with an ego ideal is that when we're born and we're in a family, right? Our ego ideal starts to come from our teachers and parents and everybody else's expectations of us. Like, oh, you're going to be a doctor. You're going to have 12 kids. You're going to do this. You're going to be a great wife. You're going to have a great hat, like all this stuff. So that would be like, I don't know about the 12 kids part. That was a little crazy. But other than that part, the rest of it, I like literally could see like, oh, okay, I'm going to be a doctor someday. But that's an idealized version of yourself. We need to learn and to teach our kids and our young adults that wherever they are in life, that's okay. Like, that's who you should be. Like, in a world where you could be anything, just be your fucking self. That's all you got to do. That idealized version, remember that every one of us, including Dr. Schultz and I, we have an ego ideal, you know what I mean? Like, we would want to make sure that we never mess up as a parent or as a wife or whatever. But you know what? It's life and we're human just like everybody else. So your ego ideal, when we try to live up to that and when we don't teach people that that is not always, and not only is it not always achievable, but sometimes people don't want to do that. Like, college isn't for everyone. My husband makes way more money than me, and he did trade. You know what I mean? Same with you, right? So, like, college isn't for everyone, and that's okay. But if your parents' idealized version of you, and they told you your whole life, like, oh, you know, we're spending a lot of money to put you through school, so you know you're going to have to go to college and like, that could really set them up for failure too. And this has nothing to do with Bryan. We're just explaining what an ego ideal is. Maybe you have an example of how Bryan's ego ideal was like he had a very high expectation for himself.
He did. And I think, you know, when we start, if like one day somebody writes a book about his story, or he even does an autobiography, I feel like we are going to find out a lot of different information about his upbringing, because, you know, along with Freud and most of us, like, the early childhood part of our lives really help create who we become. And so if that ideal, especially since I think when I was reading about their dynamics, with the fact that the daughters were very well liked and did really well in school and overachieved, you know, like, we were talking about the pedestal kind of mentality in the first episode, where he built this pedestal for himself, saying, I need to get here. My mom wants me to be here. My dad wants me to be here. Look at what my sisters do. So his ego ideal was probably super inflated if that were the cases. And then trying to constantly live up to that and fail ends up crushing his own ego. So then, you know what? Who gives a shit? Let me just go with the id, because no one else is looking at me in any other way.
Yes, because there's no need for like the super ego part. That makes total sense. I like how you put that. And again, you guys, if nobody tells you, so if you're listening to this, if you're one of the few people watching this right now, like, it's okay to have an ideal self, but it's more important to know who you are today, and also to know that today might not be where you need to be the best version of yourself, to be that goal that you want someday. And like, you're going to cross the finish line at the moment that you're supposed to, in death, like destiny, like you'll cross it when it's your time. We're not always going to be the best in everything we do, and that's okay. So if he was never taught that, or if that was never a part of, like, even if he not everybody even gets taught that in an undergrad degree in psych. So he might not have even, like, he might have been brushed over. So I noticed some teachers, like, when it's on the slide and they're just like, they read the definition and kind of go on without giving an example, like even something like that. Like I almost like wonder, like, did he know that, like, he did not have to be this idealized version that other people want for him? But then at the same time, did he want that for himself? We don't know. Frank said, I mean, the moment they knocked down his door, I'm really curious what his initial response was. Frank, we know this. Well, the cop from PA went out and said this in the very beginning before the gag order and stuff. They said that when the FBI knocked down his door, that he was in his kitchen, Frank. Ready, Frank? Let's see if this is what you'd be doing. He was in his kitchen wearing like kitchen gloves. So again, this is alleged. He was wearing kitchen gloves, in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt in his kitchen, and he was taking his personal trash and putting it in Ziploc bags. If you guys remember, they didn't find any of his DNA in his parents' trash bags. So they eventually take the neighbor's trash. And that's where they were able to make a DNA thing. Now, I would like to know if somebody's on like the criminology, like the crime scene part, if anybody knows the answer to this. I'm not sure, but it would be interesting. Does anybody know why he was putting it in Ziploc bags? Like, or do you think he was just trying to like separate it maybe and not throw it in the trash at all? I don't know. But Frank, that's what he was doing when they came in. He was separating his trash in his thing, like crazy, right? And yes, I agree with he was either panicking or cold as ice. And that's exactly true, right? And eventually, the more you do something, the more you become, what's the word I'm looking for? Desensitized, right?
Yeah.
So over time, it's like a drug. Eventually, you need more. And that's how
I'm
we
kind
should
of
try to
hoping
see it.
they haven't decided whether we're going to be able to watch the court
I
live or
will be
not.
so pissed.
Because I was watching this clinical psychologist today and he was watching his arraignment and looking at body language. And I thought something was really interesting that I'm going to continue to look for if we're able to watch this thing. So when they were naming all of the victims, he had no reaction to any of the victims except for one of them.
Wait, which one?
It was Zaina Kernodle. Yeah. So in this video his name is Dr. G Explains on YouTube, and he's a clinical psychologist, and he is, I guess, a specialist in body language. And he had these jaw clenchings only during her name multiple times, and he made more eye contact with the judge during that time as well. He had zero reaction to the rest of the names. So we may, like, if that's the case, that could add to our understanding in Freudian ways and all of the other things if he like hooks on to a reason. And now I don't know much about this girl. I'd have to go back and watch the videos about
That's jaw dropping, and let me tell you why.
When I was watching it myself, and how his jaw was constantly clutching only during her name. And so, like,
Tammy, that was Anna.
Yeah, so signs of stress, when you clench your jaw, signs of anger, possibly signs of tension of some sort. So you don't know which one it is until we find out more information. But I thought it was interesting and could give us insight into.
Wow, it give us so much insight, because she could have been obviously there's usually like a prototype. Yeah, like a prototype, which is not funny, ironic. Nina, one of the things that she was able to put together was that that girl Ashley, remember we talked about her that wound up being gay after, and she like not rejected him, but he might have interpreted it as a rejection. She just wasn't into guys. It's not, but he could have taken it as maybe she was lying or whatever because she wasn't into him. Who knows? Or just take it as a rejection. She had darker hair. So I said to Nina in the beginning, do you think that maybe he could have ran into Xana and Maddie through the Mad Greek because it was like one of the only restaurants that you could go to within like a 10-minute drive that sold anything vegan. So they had like vegan pizza and like one other thing. So could he have like been placing orders, and then could he have ran into, that's what I always thought, maybe one or two of them there. And this is the thing, Xana is the one that looks like Ashley, which would change, that would be a game changer, you guys, because that would change the whole thought process. But then why did he go to the third floor? The other two girls were on the third floor. Unless, does anybody remember? Wait, do you guys remember at the hearing? If I have a very good memory and I feel like I remember this, so, but somebody check me if I'm wrong. Wasn't one of the things Ann Taylor was arguing was that Dylan said that she heard Kaylee run down the steps and then back up the steps. If that's the case, could he have attacked Zaina and Ethan first? Then Kaylee came down, like hearing stuff to see what the hell's going on, sees him, runs up the stairs, and now hey, Nina, guess what, Nina's in the house. So Dr. Schultz was just saying that during the hearing that Kohberger only had a reaction to one of the victims' names, and guess who it was, Nina? Zana. I don't know why I just said Zana. Xana's. So if I'm correct, Nina, yeah, absolutely, Nina. I wanted you to listen because you're a big part of this, and I wanted you to be able to like help not like fact check us, but fact check us or add. You could do it in chat. That would be great. I really appreciate you, and I hope you feel better too, Nina. But Nina, so doesn't she look the closest to Ashley Frugal? I'm like almost like 100% sure that's who, like that Ashley had dark hair. Xana, he had a reaction during the PA court. You noticed it too, Nina? Nina noticed it too. Wow, you guys. That's huge. And Nina, let me know if that's the one that looks like Ashley Flugel or whatever her name was, because I feel like Ashley had dark hair, and that was the one thing that was throwing us off in the beginning, because we were not all of us, but like a lot of us were thinking definitely either Maddie or Kaylee. And so it just like didn't make sense in that way. So if Xana has dark hair, if Ashley Frugal rather has dark hair like Xana, then this would give me a whole new perception of how this whole crime was committed. And this is the thing though, right? We're going to figure it out either way because they test the knife, and he would, like, you would know who was first, second, third, or fourth, because if I hit you, then me, your DNA should be on there. And then, and then when it gets to me, it should have both of ours, then the next person. So Nina says that Melissa, Zaina, Ashley, Nicole, Emily, and Amanda do they all have dark hair? Nina, me and Nina had a conversation, y'all, a long time ago about this. And so that's why I'm like jaw dropped right now. So you guys, if this is the case, then listen. So a prototype is that first person. And what happens is a serial killer will, every time they're victimizing somebody, they're re-killing their prototype. So the original person that hurt them. And me and Nina both thought that it was strange that they all had like dark hair, but that Kaylee and Maddie had light hair. And just the way the PCA and everything, and the way the media has been talking about it, we've all assumed that they went to the third floor first. What if, y'all, he went to Xana first, not knowing Ethan was there, right? Or even knowing Ethan was there, takes Ethan out and then her, and then goes, and then like they said maybe that was true. Maybe Kaylee did run down the steps and then ran back up, like got scared and just didn't get into the room quick enough type thing. Or lock the door. I mean, who knows at that point, would that even matter, the locked door? But I feel like we would have known if the door was like busted and it wasn't. But so then he could have ran up, done that, then came back downstairs. And how creepy is this? That's the one that he said to, it's okay, I'm here to help you. Or it's okay, I'm going to help you. Mm-hmm. And how fucking creepy is that? Because it's almost like, let me put you out of your misery. And that would be so sad, you guys, because that would mean that she was awake or conscious that whole time. Because I remember Dylan does say that she heard what she thought was Xana crying, like by the bathroom. Mm-hmm. So, wow. Yeah. That's jaw dropping. All right, so you guys, let's get back to Freud real quick, because that's what we said we were going to do tonight on, and I don't want to make a liar of ourselves. So we went through the id, ego, and superego. We talked about what an ego ideal is, and this is why we can't do pedestals, everyone. Hi, Kara. Welcome. This is why we can't do pedestals, right? Because pedestals are made to fall off of. So they're just not good. So don't ever expect somebody to put you on a pedestal. No, and vice versa. Frank says no personal connection to the victims. Not sure why we keep thinking that there is. Frank, this is the thing though.
Yeah, go ahead.
There might not be a personal connection. Like Frank, you and I, we've never met, right? But you would find online that we've talked before, right? So that would be considered a connection. What if the connection was that she worked at the Mad Greek and that's where he went to go pick up his pizzas? And this is my thing. The Mad Greek in the beginning said like, oh no, that's not true. Or like, he was never here. But my thing is like, how do you know? Like, you could have paid for a pizza in cash and just don't have a receipt of his name. Or like, do you mean to tell me in 24 hours you went through every receipt for you know what I mean? So like, the Mad Greek could have just been like saying that to like get everybody off their backs because everybody was like going there asking questions. So my thing is that wouldn't make it a personal connection.
I have a little bit of a different outlook on
the please do.
So I think when people aren't in this field, you think personal connection means we've met, we've talked, we have been in the same area. However, in a psychological mind, the only personal connection that the criminal person needs is their own connection to them. So they could have built a connection that no one ever understood before, that had nothing to do with meeting her, talking to her. It could be, if we go back to this ex-girlfriend thing, he sees her, sees the ex-girlfriend in this girl just passing by, and now I built a personal connection with you. I need to help this woman because of this, and this. So it sometimes is a mental connection on only the killer's part.
And by help there, you guys, she meant that like, you know, not sarcastically, but like he says, I'm here to help, and then kills her. So
right, in his own twisted
right in his mind. That's what I just wanted to make sure they knew, that you didn't really mean like help. Yeah. So in his own yes, absolutely. That absolutely could be true. And this is the other thing, you guys. I think we also need to remember that we have to remember that legal terms are different than personal terms. So when they say that there was no connection, I don't know what the legal, like what the verbiage is legally for the state of Idaho. So it could just be same thing with the stalking, that it doesn't fit under what they consider stalking as a law, but would fit under what we would consider stalking as maybe a therapist or just a friend, right? Just as a friend, you could be like, wow, why do we keep seeing the same person over and over?
Sorry,
but
I don't understand.
Oh my God, I said the word stalking and my phone just jumped in on it to check. Nina, she just sent me a picture. And I mean, not that you could, oh yeah, you guys could see it. They all have dark hair. Mm-hmm. This is the only one in here that was killed was Xana. But the girl Ashley Frugal's in here, and is Ashley the one? Oh my God, you guys, she looks strikingly like Ashley. I'm gonna have to send you that after. Wow, thank you for sending me that, Nina. She looks so much like Ashley in that picture. Wow, that would so be a prototype. All right, so let me bring this back to Freud again. So we can do this. So, okay, we talked about the id, ego, superego, and ego ideal. The one thing we need to talk about, you guys, is the defense mechanisms. So Freud comes up with defense mechanisms saying that we create ways to deal with issues when we confront or become conflicted in some way. Do you want to add to that?
When we have anxiety, we try to
Yeah,
defend against it to make our brain feel normal. And so we use defense
exactly.
mechanisms. So when we talk about defense mechanisms, this is the one thing from Freud that I think we still fully believe in, that we fully take into today's psychology as well. I think this is his one area that has good information and research supporting it. And so these are not negative things that we do. So don't think like, oh, he's defending against something negative. No, it's a safeguard for most of us. And we all do it. Denial, repression, we all do these different to safeguard us at that moment because we're not prepared to deal with whatever that anxiety is.
That's exactly right. So Frank saying that the Mad Greek checked all their cameras and publicly responded. I know that they publicly responded that they never had him at the restaurant. But my thing is, Frank, that could also just be that they didn't want, like they also said that the girls were, or that everybody was asleep when it happened at first too. So I think like, I don't know, could that have been like a PR thing? Like maybe the who knows, Frank? I guess we're going to find out. Who knows? I don't think anybody can really say for sure, but he's right. They did say that. Like, that is facts. They said that they checked and he had never been there. But my thing is, like, could you really see everybody on camera every single day? And did they check for like the entire year? Like, I don't know. So I'm just saying
Or
part of that could
maybe
have
Brian
been,
never went into the place and he just
yeah,
stalked
he
her
could have
from the
ordered.
outside. So it's
He could have
completely plausible.
I was just gonna say he could have ordered it and went and picked it up type thing and like just ran in for a second. I don't know. But again, let's get back to Freud because that's what we know about, not the Mad Greek. So we started to talk about intellectualization, which is one of our defense mechanisms. So what we said is that we think that he intellectualizes things rather than feels them. So the last thing I said is that instead of empathizing with the victims or experiencing emotional discomfort, he could view violence as an abstract puzzle, something to be studied and dissected rather than felt. And I think that's a good way to sum up that one. Let's move on real quick to let's talk about I don't know. Do you want I could pick any of them. Let's talk about
Displacement, I think that was something
oh
he did.
okay, so wait, real quick, you guys, displacement, when we have displacement, this is my boss made me really mad and I came home and yelled at my daughter. That's just like it's why do I see he lives rent free? So rent. Anyway, that would be an example of that. So I displaced my anger. My anger is not with my child in the moment. My anger is with somebody else.
So I think another
Sirius
key
Black.
thing with displacement is
Thank
that
you.
your behavior is displaced in something that's less threatening to you. So like I want to
So
punch my
like your
boss.
child.
I want to punch my boss. I can't punch my boss. So I come home and I punish my kid instead. I have the power back. I can do that. Or I go and kick my
And
dog,
then it
whatever.
just made me think of something. So then we go home and we punish our kid who then goes over to their toys and like smashes their toy. So if you guys think about it, it's like a domino, right? So just remember that. So although the kid's less you know, what's the word you use?
Oh, less threatening.
Less threatening. Thank you. The less threatening thing, the kid's not going to have another kid right there. It's less threatening. Maybe they do. Maybe there's a baby there and they go over to the baby and like push the baby. Do you know what I mean? But the point is that they wind up then taking their aggression out on something else or someone else. So, and again, we're teaching them to do that by doing that. So, what do you have for displacement?
So for him, I just kind of have it sounds like he has some sort of deepened resentment towards past bullies, maybe towards siblings, a lot of social rejection in his life, it seems, from how he talks about it. So I think he's displacing some of that anger onto his victims. And when we think about the fact that he used a knife, the knife is one of the most personal kills besides strangling someone. So in my eyes, this is personal, and it was overkill so the overkill also gives me insight to the fact of you had rage for this person, or these people or whatever, on so many levels because of your own anger issues.
That was awesome. So what I have for displacement for him, and again, we didn't talk to each other, so we both have our own notes for each one of these, so that's why we're doing this way. But what I have is that in his case, if he did commit the crimes, that displacement could explain while his alleged actions were not just intellectualized, but also redirected from their original cause. So, and then I said, let me break this down, of course, because I can't just say one thing and I have to like go on and on. But I just I gave a few examples. So I said displacing social rejection onto others. So that would be his own feelings of rejection. So some of the reports suggest that he struggled socially, experienced bullying, and may have had difficulty forming romantic connections. If he internalized these experiences, he might have felt intense resentment, inadequacy, or humiliation, but had no way to express those emotions directly. But then I also wrote that with displacement, that could also be targeting others as a form of revenge or control. So instead of addressing his own social struggles or confronting the people who made him feel rejected, he may have displaced his frustrations onto others, possibly choosing victims who represented the kind of people who had rejected him in the past, aka Ashley Flugel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think we're onto something with that one. So
her onto Zana. Yeah.
And even if you think, so I even wrote a little note here about how he studies criminals instead of confronting his own dark thoughts. That's even displacement, you guys. So by me like focusing all of my attention on studying criminal justice, I have less time to focus in on what I have to do, right? So I can obsess over this instead of thinking about myself. It's almost like a by proxy, if you will.
That could also be an example of sublimation as well, where you're taking something appropriate and putting it into something that's seen as socially appropriate. So like I can't deal with myself and I'm having all of these like horrific thoughts. However, let me become a criminologist.
That is true. So you could look at that in both. Absolutely. I think it would depend on like how we worded it, because that would fit for both. So that's why I wrote this down, so that I wouldn't do that type of thing where I overlap. So I put, instead of acknowledging any personal violent impulses, he may have displaced them into an obsession with understanding criminals. But again, so then being the criminologist would then be sublimation. So that's why I made sure that I wrote it down very carefully. And again, you guys were doing this as if we were Freudian therapist. Okay. Even how he controlled all of the aspects of his life, like how everything, we talked last time a lot about control, so I won't go into that again. But instead of dealing with the emotional reality of being powerless, instead of always being in control, you guys, there's some things in life that we just don't have control over. And even if we want control, there's just certain things in life that we just, like, we might not want to get an ice storm tonight, but we might be getting one whether we want one or not, right? So like there's just some things that you can't control in life. So knowing that you're powerless over some things is important. And I believe, I could be wrong, but if somebody in here is, oh, Nina, if you want to share, isn't part of like being clean successfully is understanding that you're powerless in certain situations and that you don't need to be in control of everything. Again, you don't need to be your ego ideal all the time.
I'm pretty sure that's like steps 6, 7, 8, 9.
Well, I was going to say, so he displaced all of that onto his diet, his exercise, his academic achievement, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It makes total sense.
I agree.
All right. Well, we went through that one. Which one should we do next?
How about the only other one I have for him is projection.
Oh, that's a big one. He projects. So let's tell do you want to tell everybody what projection is since I was
Sure.
did the other
So
one?
projection is basically taking your thought process and putting it onto somebody else so you look like the innocent person in that. I always give the example, say I'm at a barbecue and I find my husband flirting with the neighbor and I go over and I confront him and he's like, listen, she was coming on to me first. That's him projecting what he was actually doing, but I don't want to look like I'm the one who's in the wrong here. So it was her. So I just responded to what she was giving me,
That's a
same,
good one.
so that's the one I always use in class.
The one I usually use is if like the one I use in classes is if you're like a maid of honor for your best friend and you just went through this horrific divorce and you say to your friend, like, are you sure you want to do this? Like that is projection. So just because you had a shitty marriage and a shitty divorce does not mean that your friend's not going to live happily ever after with their person. So I would be projecting, and that's not my situation. It's just an example. But that in that case, that would be me projecting my own fears and my own experiences onto my friend. And there are people that do that shit. You guys don't do that to your friends, especially on their wedding day.
Yeah.
A lot of
So when
people
it
do it
comes
like just
to Kohberger, though, I think
yeah. What do
maybe
you have for
that
that?
was
And then I'll tell you what I
happening.
have.
I think he was projecting some of his own dark thoughts onto criminals he studied, possibly. And so what happened was this goes back to
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
personalization, the intellectualization, where he's trying to distance himself from his own impulses, maybe at the very beginning. And so he's like, you know what? Let me study these criminals. Let me learn about them and realize that's not me. That's not me. And trying to see himself
Yep.
away from that. So the projection could have almost been a way for him to cure himself of whatever ailments he had. But in the end, the projection was not good enough. He never dealt with the projection and in turn ended up giving into those impulses, giving into his id, and creating, the murders.
We literally have almost like exact words for this one, so that's funny. I literally wrote instead of confronting his own insecurities or darker impulses, he may have seen those traits in others and reacted reacted on that instead, or projected, if you will. I also have that in the reports it says that he dealt with social rejection, so this may have made him feel like inferior, right? And then if he couldn't accept his own feelings of weakness or inadequacy, he might have unconsciously projected those feelings onto others, seeing them as the ones who were inferior, foolish, and undeserving of success. So if it's true that he always wants to be the smartest in the room, he was the best at criminology, the best at this, the best. So it seems like he took everything to the extreme too. But everybody, it seems like, says that he always wanted to this is almost a direct quote, if I remember. His friend said something along the lines of, he wanted you to know that whether how smart you are, that he still was smarter than you. Like he was one of them. Nina sent me something. Let's see. Nina. Nina, is this something I could read? Let me know because I don't want to just like read this. Oh, Nina, if I could read this, I'm going to save this because I have notes for this for the next thing. So that would be really cool. Hi, Texas. Hi, PKC. Hi, everyone. The only one we're missing is Truth. I can't believe Truth isn't here. So real quick, just going back to projection, I have that some students in his criminology classes, they were saying that he would challenge professors aggressively or talk down to peers. This could have been an attempt to externalize his own inner doubts by making others feel lesser. So that's that same thing that you were saying. And then you also said, wait, you said something else that I said exactly. Anyway, we said the exact same thing. But I guess what I would say for you guys, for your own lives, when it comes to projection, I always say we don't like in other people what we don't like about ourselves, and that's projection, right? So we tend to pick out so the next time you're criticizing somebody else, see if you do whatever it is that you're criticizing them for. So for example, if you're cheating and you want to see your spouse's phone every 2 minutes, you're probably just projecting the fact that you're being a cheat. and they might not have done a damn thing wrong. That's projection, right? So I think that's important too. I also, let me see if I had any other ones here that I put, or let me look through some of my notes because I really took this assignment seriously. So I wrote, I wrote something about, and this isn't about the defense mechanism. That's funny because they were the ones that I wrote for him too. So we literally had the same exact thought process so far, and we did not share notes. So that's actually funny. So I put about his reported awkwardness, and he definitely had like what people said was like his social awkwardness. Wait, hold on. Let me just make sure that was the only defense mechanism. I think it was. If I find a different one, I'll let you guys know. But as of right now, I think that was the only ones I had. But I put many who encountered Kohberger described him as socially awkward, intense, and robotic. And you could even see that, like, even when he's talking to the cop, the lady cop in the one video, he seems a little robotic. He's like, we don't have crosswalks in PA. I'm like, wait, what? Like, where do you live? Because, well, I know where he lives. But anyway, but I put, instead of forming natural emotional connections, he may have analyzed social interactions as systems. So figuring out patterns, rules, behaviors logically rather than encouraging with people on an emotional level. So if he struggled with rejection, intellectualization could have been his way of controlling social experiences rather than risking vulnerability. And that is a very Freudian thing to say right there, you guys. And again, so not all of this is exactly like how I necessarily, and that's why I love this assignment, because I feel like I now have a better psychological profile in my head of him because this assignment forced me to think in a way that I think sometimes, but that I wasn't necessarily considering the first time around that I totally consider now. For example, let me give you an example. Some of like the things, I'm trying to think of something specific. Like some of the things that before this, I was attributing it to something else when really there was an explanation just by looking through Freud's work, if that makes sense. So where before I was more focused on like, not a diagnosis, but a diagnosis, like we were going through personality disorders stuff, where I think a lot of the things that he did were things like as a result of like defense mechanisms from being hurt. And this is the thing, you guys, if you look at people when you're young, like if you don't like somebody, look at a picture of them when they're a kid, and it's really hard to dislike somebody as a child because you see the innocence in them. So it's like you can almost, and again, nobody's saying that what he did is okay. He's obviously needs to be in jail or death penalty or whatever he gets, he deserves it. If he's the person, I mean, allegedly, right? But you could see how hurt people and how hurt people's personalities develop differently because of that. So if you guys are very defensive, or if anybody ever has accused you of being, or been like, why are you so defensive? I guarantee the person that's being defensive has been highly criticized in the past. So, and when we're hyper criticized, we're hyper defensive. So that's why sometimes, like, for example, Frank, my daughter's birthday party, I was at Sam's Club and I needed to hurry up, and I was wrong. I shouldn't have done this. I was like so into like, no, Frank, that's not what I mean. Like that, like I stopped what I was doing, which was really important for my daughter. And I was going back and forth with Frank because I didn't want him to think, I was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Like, and it was, what was my point? What was I just saying? I just had an ADHD moment.
You were talking about looking at people as children.
Oh,
and their
no, and then after that, yes, about personalities and about how you don't like in other people what you don't like about yourself. I noticed that Frank was doing stuff that I was doing. So I was like, that's when I stopped it. And I was like, wait, just go back to what you were doing with your kid. And me and Frank are good. Like, and again, do you know what I mean? So like, I think a lot of times, so it forced me, that's what I was saying. Instead of just being like, fuck you and like leaving, it forced me to stay. And that's what you guys should learn too, is like stay. If something makes you feel uncomfortable, now, of course, if somebody's disrespecting you, get out of there. But Frank wasn't disrespecting me. He was challenging my thought process. So that was okay. So instead of just being like, F you, Frank, like, and then just blocking them, which anybody could do that to me too, right? But instead of doing that, I felt it was important for me to like let Frank know that like, no, that's not what I meant, Frank. Like I meant da 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 da. And I did. We obviously worked it out because here we are today. Whenever I see he's live, I get on Frank. I don't get notifications for anybody. It's the weirdest thing. But for some reason, whenever I go on my YouTube, it'll be like, Frank just ended 2 minutes ago. I'm like, really? It's not even like 2 hours ago. It'll be like 2 minutes ago. I'm like, oh. So maybe we do need to exchange numbers so you could tell me when you're going live so I could listen in more. But some of the other notes, I don't know if you have other notes. Some of the other notes I had, let's see. I'm just seeing if there's anything that I have here that we didn't really talk about. I have a lot of.
I have a lot about Freud was the one to propose the death drive.
Tell them what that is. I know that. I think I have that written
a
somewhere.
subconscious desire for destruction, basically, chaos, aggression, and it's the opposite. We know that there's an eros, which is the life instinct, right? Everybody wants to live and survive and thrive, but he also said there's also this part of us that gears towards a death drive where we thrive in the destruction and we thrive in the chaos. But what happens is our personalities, just when you guys even learn about Big Five and the different ends of extroversion versus introversion, there's always an opposite in personality, right? So when we're developing these personalities, there's opposites. So if there's life, there's got to be death. And so he said, we can't, just because we want life doesn't mean that we can't appreciate death or thrive on death or anything like that, which could be why some of us get thrill out of learning about serial killers and all of that kind of stuff, is because of this death drive. So for instance, this can be like examined in two different ways. We could look at it internally, where people have negative thoughts that revolve either around death, destruction, anything like that. But that also can turn into self-harm or suicide. And so for him, the eating disorder could have been self-harm, all that kind of stuff. Or we could do it externally as well, where it's looked at through, and we handle it through aggression, war, chaos on the outside, things like that, which would have been what he was doing if he allegedly did these killings, for instance.
I agree with that. And Nina's right. So Nina, the death drive would fall under Thanatos. So this would be, I actually had this in my notes too. So this is I just put that it's a concept where people have an unconscious desire to engage in destructive behavior. So literally what you had, but I think it's funny because we literally have the exact same things, you guys. But I also added in here about Freud might have linked, and not me, but Freud might have linked his how he was uncomfortable around women and stuff, possibly starting at or attempting to control his interactions. A Freudian might link this to unresolved Oedipus complex, in which deep-seated resentment towards his mother or women in general led to unconscious hostility. His inability to form meaningful romantic relationships could be attributed to castration anxiety, where rejection from women reinforced feelings of emasculation. Again, you guys, this is what Freud would have thought, not me necessarily, but just so you guys know that castration anxiety, it's not really like you're afraid that you're going to get castrated. It's a term that Freud used, and he used it when you feel emasculated by women. I shouldn't even say it because I have to live here. But there's like a neighbor who does this to her husband sometimes out back, and like everybody hears it and we're like, don't do that. Like, you're like, by making him not feel like a man is not helping your situation. Like, that is the worst thing you could do right now, is to demasculinate him or whatever. So that's all castration anxiety is about. And then I also Freud also talks about repetition compulsion. So I put a Freudian concept, repetition compulsion, suggests that individuals unconsciously revisit traumatic events in an attempt to process unresolved emotions. So if Kohberger did return, I was talking about when he returns to the scene of the crime, he could have been trying to relive his experience, and that would fit into a Freudian thought process. So again, I think this is what I want to make sure that I get that I make sure that I talk about real quick is that we have a logical part of our brain and we have an emotional part of our brain. Okay, so we have our logical part. So let me give you an example. I do this a lot. Sometimes my emotional brain gets ahead of me. And I would say you're more logical. Like you're probably a good balance. Me and your son always talk about how like you're like a good balance. Like you're right in the middle. I'm a little bit more emotional, you guys. But anyway, I'm getting better. So, but one of the ways that you get better at doing this, at balancing your emotional and your logical brain, is by acknowledging it when it happens. So, for example, in the moment, I sometimes, like my daughters and I will be like, it wasn't that deep. And in other words, that just means like, wow, like you just took that way too. Or like maybe you're getting defensive. And again, it could just be that you've been highly criticized in your life. So that defensiveness could be like an emotional reaction to what the other person's saying instead of being logical. So somebody cuts you off and you freak out on them, right? Like that would be emotional. So anger and or crying, either way, that would still be an emotional reaction. The logical reaction might be like, wait, what if like they're on their way to the hospital? Like what if somebody's like about to give birth in the car? Like, or what if it's like a teenage driver who got their license yesterday and just got scared and accidentally cut you off? Like, so our logical brain is the one that makes our emotional brain slow down a little bit. So I would say to you guys that when you're in a situation and you feel like you're having extreme anxiety, and Abby, if you're listening, I want you to do this too, okay? And again, this is just because me and Abby talk about anxiety and stuff sometimes, and we have like good tricks for each other. But when, for any of you, when you're in a situation and your emotional brain is kicking in and maybe the situation might not really be as bad as your emotional brain's telling you it is in the moment, you try to speed up your logical brain by doing it on purpose. So thinking logically, like what's really behind this. And one of the things that I'm most known for in my classes and amongst my students, and any student that's ever had me has heard this, or anybody that's ever known me has heard this, I always say, you guys, whatever the situation is, the good news is it's not about you. The bad news is it's not about you. And that's how it goes with a lot of things. So sometimes in life, things should be more about us and it's not. And then at times, you know, we feel like it's about us, but it's like, no, that wasn't about you. That was about the person. And again, that's a lot of this Freudian stuff. I didn't realize how Freudian that really was until I just said it. But again, it's just trying to make your logical brain speed up and slow down your emotional brain. You know what I mean? And be like, look, like I know that might have felt personal, but that wasn't about you. However, the bad news is it wasn't about you. So sometimes maybe it should be a little bit more about you. Mm-hmm. What do you have to say about any of that, about the logical or emotional part of the brain? You agree, right? You have a pretty good balance.
I try to, not always. It depends on the situation, you know, like
you had to say that you had to speed up one or slow one down. Do you think you would benefit from speeding up emotional, or
sometimes I need to speed up emotionally? You know, even with, we've had a couple deaths recently, and I handle death very differently than a lot of people, where my brain is most fully logical with death. So I come off as cold and arrogant.
Is that where, did Abby have you for Death and Dying?
No, I don't think, I can't remember, Ab, if you did.
No, Abby,
personality. No, she did. She did, because she had me for personality, and that, unless it was for child or adolescent, I can't remember. But for, I think she did. I can't teach this. But it was, I tend to come off quite cold.
She said I did, goof.
I'm like, I can't remember. Because she's taken me so many times. So, yeah, so I come off as cold, and people look at me like I don't really cry. I'm more of a contagion crier than it actually coming from my emotional brain. And so that sometimes needs to catch up but my logic, I think being more logical still doesn't like affect me in a negative way, because even if I can look at it and be like, okay, you have to be sympathetic. Other people deal with this differently. Everyone grieves differently. So it kind of helps me balance it without trying to look cold, even though I still may not have the same emotional reaction. That
You
makes
guys,
sense.
I think that is such a good, yes, it makes total sense. I think that is such a good lesson too in that because, like she's saying, even if she's not feeling the emotion in the moment, and just like sometimes I'm not feeling the logic in the moment, because it is easier said than done, right? I know that there's logic in it, and she knows that there should be emotion in it, right? So you could still react or respond. I always say respond, don't react to things. Reaction is but when you respond to something, that means that you thought about it first, right? So again, I might speed up my logical brain and you might speed up your emotional brain in some situations just so that we could get balanced again. But we all do this. Abby's saying what she's saying. She said, she told me to do more in life and I took it personally, but she just wants to push me to do better. That's great. That's funny. But I'm sure she didn't mean it in a negative way, Abby, you goof. And then she said, she said she was being overly dramatic. I thought she was just insulting me, but she was just trying to get me to be my best self. Now, wait, Abby. Anya's like, oh no, because obviously neither one of us would ever do that. But so wait, do you want to respond to that? Here, let me put that up there. You're like,
no,
I know.
No,
Abby.
Abby knows what I probably would say to her right now.
And I guess that's another thing too, right? So Abby knows us both well enough to know that if we say something, like she said, at first she thought, but like you said, she knows you well enough now to know like what you really meant by that. And I would say the same thing too. So she has to understand me differently because I might have responded to the exact same thing that she asked you very emotionally, right? And then so I guess everybody's different. And so part of the
Abby's
lesson here,
emotional though, so it's not surprising that
yes,
and she
Abby,
knows
me and
that,
you can like
and she
cry
knows that, and
ourselves.
so, but again, that's probably why because she leads with her emotional brain, that is probably why she had the reaction to her friend that she did, and then it took her a second to say, "Listen, let's think this through."
Oh my God, I
Okay.
thought she was talking about you.
No, I
I
think
missed
she's
that
talking about
part.
her friends.
She is. Oh my God, Abby, I was about to text you like, what the fuck? What are you doing? I thought you were talking about Dr. Schultz. I missed the part about your friend. And I'm like, oh my God, how do you want to respond to this? And here she was talking about her friend. Oh my God, thank God. That makes me feel better. Okay, then.
Oh no, me and Abby.
But that just showed you in real time that my emotional brain was
Went
like,
there.
oh my God, save this, save this, save it. And then my logical brain, after you said that, I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. She's talking about her friend. So again, a lot of this is intentional and it gets easier over time, but you have to be very intentional about it. Some of like my final things that I have here is that when we started with the id, ego, and super ego, and of course I didn't have my notes out when we did that, but just so people know, Kohberger's intellectualization, that's what I keep going back to in my notes, is that he intellectualized everything. So almost like made everything a science. Like, let me figure it out. Or like a formula, like this equals this equals this. So it allowed him to avoid emotional vulnerability by controlling knowledge, social interactions, and even his physical self. If it's true that he got those two numbers at that pool party, that would explain this. That would be his way, whether he called the numbers or not, but his way to control his social situation, saying, can I have your number? So even if the girls gave him a fake phone number, the fact is that he got the number, right? So, and he didn't feel that insecurity in the moment that some of us may have. I don't know. But I put his id as is primal emotion. So your id is your primal emotion. I put his was buried, meaning, his was buried, meaning he may have struggled to process or express emotion. Oh, as far as emotion in a normal way. And then his ego, his logical mind, dominated, turning his life into an academic challenge rather than emotional experience. And then I put his super ego, his morality, may have been weak, lacking remorse, or strong, causing deep repression and detachment. Oh, detachment's one of them too. So detachment was a big one, but we talked about that last time too. So again, I think my big thing too is that he stood away from the emotional because let's be honest, you guys, emotions hurt sometimes, right? So, and the eating disorder and the drugs and all of that is all a way. I could say from experience with the eating disorder, especially, right, that was a way to feel like I was in control, even though I was very out of control. So, and the thing is that at the time, I was very like I went into that logical thing and tried not to feel emotion, and that's part of what the eating disorder was. So I feel like he like had like a cross addiction, if you will, where he went from like he gave up his eating disorder and then went to addiction or vice versa. Either way, it's still that's why I say ego depletion. I will give Nina that. Nina's been talking about the ego for a minute. And Nina, you're the reason that we said that we were going to look into Freud tonight, which is why I wanted to text you because I didn't want you to miss this because you were the whole reason that we even looked at this through a
I
Freudian
definitely agree
lens.
with her too. You get to a
I
point if you don't know for the people watching, if you don't know enough
Yes,
about how
please.
the ego and the superego balance each other out, the ego is constantly trying to play referee between the id and the superego. And we make so many choices in a day that eventually our ego is like, dude, I've had it. And so that little mesh that keeps the id instincts back in your unconscious start to seep out. And when you lose control of that, you get ego depletion. And then eventually you give in to the ego and you're doing things that you should not be doing.
That's exactly right. And I also wrote that you're exactly right. That so a lot of this, you guys, could be like violent fantasies. So he may have had violent fantasies, social frustrations, or deep-seated anger that again, with the id, that if he started to intellectualizing everything, it would suggest that he pushed all of that id or all of that emotion into his unconscious, which would then reject raw emotional experiences. So Nina, I think that you're definitely onto something there too. So he may have had violent fantasies due to that. And then I put for the ego or irrational thinking, this is what he relied on. So the ego is the rational decision-making part of the psyche that balances the id and the superego, or your impulses and your reality. So intellectualization is an ego-driven defense mechanism, allowing a person to suppress chaotic emotions in favor of cold logical thinking. So we were talking about the emotional brain and the logical brain. This would be where you're putting the emotional brain. So I mean the emotional brain on pause so much so that you're just all logic. And if you think about it in that way, you could see how he can compartmentalize and put these four people into a box that was just an item and not a human. And like he didn't think about a Steve Gonzalez and like that they had parents and that they had siblings and that they had loved ones, and that was none of that was considered because he was able to compartmentalize. And by doing that, he was able to make them objects. And by doing that, he was able to create a mission and then go through with it. And that's how I feel. And I do think that looking at this through a Freudian lens really did help me because I'm less likely now to be looking at like schizoid type thing and stuff like that, and looking more at things like trauma and how trauma goes into our unconscious thought process when it's not dealt with, and that it can then turn into something like an eating disorder or like a drug addiction or any substance abuse, or in this case the ultimate. And if you guys think about it, right, isn't it all like kind of, if you think about it with a drug addict, right, you start to not even a drug addict, forget that, you go to the bar and the first time you drink 2 drinks get you buzzed, and then after like a couple months you need 3 drinks to get you buzzed, then you need 4 drinks. It's just tolerance, right? So that happens with anybody. That has nothing to even do with addiction. But if you could think about this, in my head, his violence over the years, it kind of happened like that. And even his emotional part, right? So I feel like it went from like, eventually, I guess what I'm trying to say is eventually the fantasy got to the highest level of fantasy that it was like he graduated from fantasy and then started to do reality. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
ego depletion would then lead to instant gratification. You're right, right? If
Yeah.
you act on it, Nina, right? So there could be somebody else who has a depleted ego that maybe like crashes, right? Like, or so like you don't necessarily have to act out. I think his ego depletion, his instant gratification was to intellectualize it, because ego depletion, because he was all logic and no emotion, not no, but he pretty much
Mhm.
had very little emotion. So that would make sense why in his case, ego depletion, and I'm putting this all together in real time. I'm like making these connections, but that's why in his case, in ego depletion, I think when I think of ego depletion, sometimes I often think of it in like a psychology way with like anxiety or depression. So like on like a depressed thing, instead of like an active thing where like that would lead to rage. But just so you guys know, anger is depression. I mean, depression is anger turned inward. So they're both the same, the opposite sides of a coin, right? But they're both the same thing, and both are dysfunctional. So I guess with ego depletion, what I'm saying is that I'm getting like that whole connection of how it doesn't just have to be depleted and then go into depression. It could be depleted and then go into violence. And again, it depends on your id, your superego, and your
Well, I think
environment
it
and
depends
all
on a
this.
lot of things too. I mean,
Yes.
if we think about Kohberger, he was getting when I think he started to ego deplete, he had done this multiple times, I think, throughout his adolescence. You know, when you look at all of his negativity and depersonalization and depression and all of those things, those are ego depletion taking the better of him. And then I think him getting back to the gym was his way of getting back his ego depletion, and then he loses it again with the drugs, he loses it again with the eating disorder, and then
And then he regains
so on.
control again. Right.
You know, for us who are, let's just say, you know, normal non-psychotic individuals, you know, it may be a lot easier to be like, okay, let me make a list, what needs to get done, I'm gonna, and we're not, our brain isn't even functioning to go that far to into the
Right.
shadow world of who we are.
Right. And the thing is that with ego depletion, you guys, that this is something that would happen over time. So it's like over, constant episodes of like these different things happening could lead to something like this, right? So I am totally with that. And I think it also goes back to intellectualizing, repressing and projecting his inner conflicts. Ego depletion could explain why he may have eventually lost control and acted out in a violent way. So
It could
I do
also,
agree with that.
you know, if you add another one on there, repression probably works in that point as well. Trying to kind of
That what?
ignore everything, repression, trying to
Mm-hmm.
push it all down and being like, I'm not even dealing with this. I'm not going to look at this. And then all of a sudden, you've not looked at it for so long, it now implodes. And you end up as an addict, as with an eating disorder, with rage, with aggression.
Yeah, you guys just think about like when you fight with somebody like a loved one that like you don't, instead of communicating every time they get on your nerves, you just keep it like let it build up, build up, build up, and then they say something stupid and like they say something that should have like your reaction should have been a 1, but it was a 12, and it's like what in the hell? So that was like a build up over time that you just exploded. So we usually say like the straw that broke the camel's back or whatever that saying is, but it's that same type of thing, right? So it's like eventually you're depleted. And yeah, I agree with all of this. And I think that, again, that this was good that we looked at it in this way. When it comes to his fantasies, I did just have one thing about that I wanted to say, and I'm trying to find it. I wrote, if Kohlberger had violent thoughts, social frustrations, or power fantasies, any type of fantasies, but constantly suppress them throughout his academic study, his rigid routines, which I believe it's been said that he's very rigid, like, so he wouldn't even eat, according to his aunt, in pots that she cooked beef in before, so she had to go out and like buy new pots for him to eat there. Could you imagine? I would just have acted like my stomach hurt and didn't eat or whatever. I don't know. But anyway, his that would also lead to extreme self-control too, right? So being out of control, what's the opposite of that? So I guess that's the thing, you guys. He can't find a normal balance in life. Everything's an extreme. It's like he's either, addicted or clean. And when he's clean, there's like reports of him saying that nothing, I believe I read it in one of his things, that he would never, nothing could ever talk him into doing it again. So it's like he goes from one to the other. So he's always at an extreme. Same thing with eating disorders. That's an extreme type thing too. So again, it's like he's never able to find a balance anywhere. Even when it comes to this, if he's the one that did it allegedly, that there's no, I mean, that's just the ultimate. I don't know. So none of this proves any guilt, does it? Absolutely not. A people for his name. We're actually here as psychology professors, and we're using the case as a way to talk about things like Freud and ego depletion and things like that, so that the other people that are here that are tuning in, that are interested in it, so that they can have a place where maybe some of this stuff even makes sense to them in their own life. Because we talked about projection and displacement, and even things like a people for his name, even and again, I don't know why you're calling it conjecture. We're talking about Freud, so I don't know where that just came from. But anyway, so let's just move on, because I'm not even going to dignify that with a response. We're not saying like whatever. Anyway, so just so you guys know, for everybody else listening, that we all have stuff that we bring with us from our childhood. And I guess the point here is that it's okay, because we know that everybody has stuff that we've all been through, right? So it's about going through the things as you go through them and feeling them when you feel them, as opposed to letting them build up inside, or using something like substance or eating like I did as a way to mask it. And there you go. Is there anything? Wait, there are many strict vegans that are like that. Like what? I missed something. Sorry, honest. Hi, honest.
Pot that was cooked with beef.
Oh, right. But wait, honest, wouldn't you though? Like, and maybe it's just me, because again, I have that, yes, he does have a lot of polarization. But I'm the type where, like, instead of having my aunt go buy new pots, I would have I probably just would have acted like I had a stomach ache and like ate something in the car on the way there. And then and again, does that make it right? No, I'm just telling you what I would have done as a human. I'm not telling you what you should do as a psychologist. Like, so this is I'm just saying that's where my flaw would be. So instead of just being honest, I might have been like, oh, I have a stomach ache. I'm good. Like, thank you. And
for him, though, it kind of makes sense with the idea of the narcissistic perspective that we took, or even the idea that he's not seen. Like, again, I've told you I'm a vegan and you disrespect that by cooking in these things. So I think, once we see more, and I don't know if we'll ever see the whole truth, but a lot of this may make sense one day. Yeah.
No, you're right. And if you could also see it as excessive self-discipline. And again, that would be the opposite of out of control. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, I think this was a great episode. I don't know if you're down to do another. It's up to you.
Always.
But so this is the thing. If anybody has suggestions on what we should focus in on next week, please let us know. Oh, wait, somebody wants us to keep in mind something. Let's see. But keep in mind, he wasn't vegan for the thoughtfulness of it. He ate vegan diet for health. So, yeah. So what Nina was able to find out, and I saw all the receipts, and, she was right. And he even says it in his Tappa Talk. Like, it's funny, too, because I'm like, they should have, like, given him money or whatever. The way he says it, he's like, he does this whole thing. And at the end, he's like, but I have a diet that'll fix it. And I'm like, wait, where did that come from? But again, the Kaufman diet. He was trying to get rid of his visual snow and stuff like that. That was another thing we learned throughout these 3 episodes, is that he self-diagnosed until he got to Dr. Perchuk, of course. And then I don't know what happened. But the visual snow, we believe he self-diagnosed as far as we know. We could be wrong. But again, even if you go to a doctor for that, there's not like a test. So it would be kind of like us, saying somebody's depressed. Like, there's not a blood test, but we would be using our ethical APA, standards and what we learned with the DSM-5 TR and stuff like that to make a diagnosis. But here he thought, and again, it seemed to have worked for him, that the vegan diet would take away his visual snow. So it's interesting because Nina, does he ever go on to say if the visual snow went away from it? But I did read that, you guys, the whole thing about the Kaufman diet. It was like, yes, it was like keto, but back then, this was like before everybody was like, into keto and all this stuff. It was like in the beginning of that stuff, but then he wound up finding that he could use diet. But then again, I'm going to have to go back and do some of my timeline again to see like what comes first, this or that. But if you guys have any like suggestions for where you want us to focus on next week, what do you think, Nina? What's a good topic we could focus on with this case for next week that has to do with psychology? Like, what should we look into further? Let me even think. Wait, there are many people who are vegan who became vegan just to show a higher and mightier than thou type of complex. Not sure what it's called, and I'm not surprised if he was like that. Threatened egotism. There you go. Should we talk about threatened? Did we kind of talk about that tonight? That we can expand on threatened egotism for sure, and maybe we could do so by looking at anything we can find. Again, with his own writings, that way, like we never went over his song yet.
I was gonna say, I mean, we can try and analyze his song step by step in the aspect of
Absolutely,
threatened
and that would
egotism,
definitely bring. Yes, I was gonna say
or
that would
even
bring up
like any
threatened
of his
egotism.
Papa Talk stuff.
That's what I'm saying. So we could, that way we're using his own words, so nobody could say that we're using conjecture or whatever, because we'll be using his own words. So that would be him. So, and again, you guys, I hope everybody is respectful about this, and and this might not be the channel for everybody, and that's okay too. You know what I mean? This is just for people who are interested in this topic, and I found that a lot of people are. So thank you so much for joining me, and thank you, everyone. Do you want to say anything to everybody before we go?
Nope, just thanks everybody for being here. I had fun.
And tune in next week at 7:30, and we'll do our homework, and we'll talk about, we'll use his stuff. So, and if anybody has anything, my email is jamievona@gmail.com. So it's JAIME. I'll put it in the chat real quick. jamievona@gmail. Oh, I don't know why we just got bigger. Oh, because it was me. Oh my God, I'm such a goof. I think I did that earlier too, where I thought I was writing one here, but I wasn't. Oh, I know what I was writing too, Frank. I don't know if you're still here, but if you are, Frank was like, "What are you talking about? I don't even know what you're talking about," which again falls into this whole topic of tonight, because something where Frank is a critical, he's like, "Yes, I'm here, Frank, I'm going to explain this." That was actually great that you said that, because you just gave me another example of how my own thought process. Oh, he was being sarcastic. I was going to say, so you guys, if he wasn't being sarcastic and he really meant like, what are you talking about? I could argue that and just say that Frank is a critical thinker, and he does. He'll challenge people, which is what you're supposed to do. And like, you're supposed to challenge people. You're not supposed to just take everything people say, So I would have just said that because he's a critical thinker and I just met him and didn't know that about him, I might have, my own emotional brain might have been like, he's coming for you. And to him, it might have been like, "Oh no, I'm just asking you a question." Like, but that's a good example too, you guys, of how don't take everything that you read, even in comments that people write to you, or even things that they say to you. Again, if it makes you feel bad about yourself in some way, just ask them to elaborate on what they meant. Just be like, "Wait, is this what you meant?" And even repeat what you heard, because sometimes what we hear and what we say are two different things, right? So again, by doing that, you can help with communication. I don't know. It was just a final thought. But Frank, I wanted to explain it because I started typing it earlier and then just erased it because I had to write my email. So I figured I would just tell you instead of writing it. But I appreciate you all. And thank you all for being here tonight. Please subscribe if you're not subscribed. That's the only way we're not monetized. So it's the only way our videos are going to get out there is if people like it and subscribe to that YouTube. And Frank, thank you for understanding. I don't know. I didn't get that. See, I didn't even get your sarcasm. And that would be another example of this Freudian shit. I can go on and on. Thank you guys for all being here. And I appreciate you all. And thank you, Dr. Schultz. And I will see you in a week.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye, everyone.